Okay, hello and welcome. My name is Tomlins Nyback, and this is 365 Days to Racial Change, day 32. Thank you. I want to do something different, start something maybe for the next few months. The first of the month, I want to do a new program, add a new twist to racial change, and that will be Black First in America. And when I want us to get on the same page, I'm not talking about blacks copying white institutions, not the first black mayor or the first black surgeon, first black Supreme Court person, or the first black sergeant, things like that. Those are all copies, very notable things. But I want to talk about like Michael Jackson's Moonwalk or the inventor of traffic lights. Um, uh, Photographing the sun's corona, taking an institution, a process, just to a whole new level. That's what I want to talk about on the first of the month here. So it's interesting. We got February. It's the first. It's a Friday. I didn't mean it for all that to line up that way. It just did. The stars just aligned. So let's quickly get on the same page. Why are we here? What are we doing here? This is about black issues, black life in America. We were going to talk about the influence of slavery, white entitlement, white empowerment, black vulnerability, issues in the community, politics, economics, all of the above. In bits and pieces through this year, we got 1 month out of the way. We're doing well. This is Black History Month. So there's maybe some more impact there. We are influenced and informed by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. I got to do a section, give you his resume one of these days, but he's been on presidential campaigns, head of education in Florida, great, he's got a military career, very successful guy, and I was introduced to him through a mutual friend, and I've just been on fire ever since after reading some of his work. I've read 3 of his books. He's got a handful of things out there, and he still goes around speaking. I encourage you to YouTube him as soon as you can. And I want you to get these books too if you can. Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor and White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice. And his book, Powernomics, the National Plan to Empower Black America. Also, it's not going to be all racism and slavery. Like today, we're taking off a little bit, not even referencing much of his work today. So, on that note, every once in a while, we'll get into some story time, fictional account of white mastership and Black Slavery in America, very famous book, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Female white abolitionist, very influential work and influenced theater, media, some stereotypes about whites and blacks in America, how we interact with each other. And I feel that her work has impact on America today. We get blackface from her work and a lot of stuff like that. Go ahead and Google that if you're not sure what blackface is. We're going to have a section on that eventually. Also, behind me, hashtag us too. Forgive me for rushing through. I do this kind of every beginning of every segment so we can get on the same page. New people may be joining us uh, without some foundation of background. So I think this is very appropriate for the first 4 or 5 minutes. Hashtag us too, hashtag USTOO. You can also, that's a community where you can talk about black issues and communities. Also a website called Blag Enough, BLAGG Enough. Sure. So once you start typing that, I'm sure it'll come up in your browser or maybe Facebook as well. I got to admit, I'm not a big social media person, but this is just in case you want to connect. Okay, today, Black First. Today's Friday. It's not just because it's Friday that February is the first, but the first of the month we want to do a Black First, and not just the blacks copying stuff, but blacks that are the first people on Earth to do something. Okay, and um, we're going to try to find those issues. There's a lot of Black First. Once you Google that in your web browser, they'll tell you a lot of Black First who were Supreme Court justices, surgeons, and successful military careers, and all that. But that's blacks coming in, occupying space like trying to prove something. It's very valid what those blacks did first, but it's coming like me making these videos. White people ages before me made videos. I'm not doing anything first. So one day I hope I can have an original thought and do something first, like some of the people will talk about today. And today's first is not as a kind of I want to violate my own rules here, but I think it's notable because this is Black First in business in a way, and this is probably not the first black business person, but I want to just note this individual and his company, and we could talk about some issues around this. Okay, the C.R. Patterson and Sons company. This was a vehicle manufacturer. These guys and this gentleman. He was actually an escaped slave, made it to Ohio. When the car company got going, we'll get to this in a little bit. I'll give you a little bit of background first. Uh, but his company is contemporary of Ford and General Motors. Okay, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But I don't think I've heard of this company before. But he's back then with the late 1800s through the Depression and things like that is what we'll talk about. His name was Charles Richard Patterson, hence C.R. Patterson and Sons Company. And he was a blacksmith. When he came to Ohio, applied his trade and everything. But then he eventually partnered. We got mechanization and machinery beginning to make movement here just after the Civil War and stuff. And so the North is really um, moving forward with its industrialization, and most naturally, most people got caught up in that big, giant machines. I mean, think of it. If you're watching this on your phone or a computer right now, you got to think that the first computers filled whole buildings, and you can almost walk around in the components inside the computers. Well, these big machineries and wheels and things like that were getting more refined, getting smaller and smaller, and now we're getting into the automobile age of Patterson and Sons, Ford, and General Motors. Now I can say, I can have a black representation in that, to smooth out the historical context, because it wasn't all. So see, like I said about the fireworks, the white fireworks, Ford, General Motors, boom, and you don't see any black competition. It's in this instance, the story, the black competition is crushed, but there was a presence, that there was a representation there. It wasn't all monopolized in theory by whites. They had the manpower and a lot of stuff went into their success, but blacks were there. Okay, they were part of this. So Charles Richardson, he partners with J.P. Lowe. They bring their forces together, and their business, though, initially was horse-drawn carriages. So we have horsepower. If you talk about this V8 engine has X amount of horsepowers. I mentioned, I was joking with a friend. We were watching a drag racing or something, and the announcer said, "Yeah, the car has 400 some horsepower and stuff." And I turned to my friend. I said, "That's a mighty long whip." So horsepower. So horsepower is real. Things were drawn by horses. You'll see the Budweiser beer commercial, the Clydesdales, horsepower. Okay, so that was going on. But then Patterson, 1893, bought. He became partners in 1873 with J.P. Lowe, and 20 years later, Patterson buys Lowe's share of the business. Now, this is in light of the automobile is about to break forth on the market and retire horsepower um, everywhere. So this is, he's coming out, but at the same time, Ford and General Motors, they're working on, producing cars, but they're working on mass production. Ford's, he didn't invent cars. There were plenty of cars. There were steam-powered cars. The combustion engine was always being worked on and things like that. Well, Ford had the assembly line idea, which made Ford expansion go, and I think that was one of the things that hindered Patterson in his competition with Ford because I didn't get much into the article. Just a quick note that you can go to blackpast.org and see a whole lot of Black First. This is where I'm getting this information from today. Blackpast.org. So back to production. So Patterson's cars, I'm guessing, he didn't compete because of production, and he's black, so that's part. Never divorce color and race from America. Any American story, put it in there. That's part of it. That smooths it out. That makes it understandable. That makes it rational and reasonable. But he was, I'm guessing he was hindered by this mass production and things like that, um, which would drive the Ford's price down and things like that. We're going to talk about quarantines and sequestering in a little bit. But I'm guessing that Patterson's cars were probably more custom made, like a BMW type level, very a lot of handcrafted detail things in there, and as opposed to a modular post where people are putting on, here's the axle and the tire and the bumper and the chassis and the inside, and but these probably cars were more custom made. And the evidence kind of that is that the website says only 150 of these cars really were made, just as his company was consumed by Ford and General Motors, just power, might, um, a white um, class, probably preferring the white car makers and stuff like that. But I do want to save that discussion a little bit because it's 1893. He's going on, and at 1910, Charles died. He gives the business. His son Frederick inherits the business. And these cars, they say it costs about $150. I mean, sorry, $850 back then. Probably real class act. None of the cars themselves survived to this day. The carriages did, but it was a four-cylinder engine. It's interesting, the cycle of engines. That's we start off four-cylinder, and then engines got bigger, 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 and now they're smaller, smaller, smaller again. Guys, where six cylinders is probably common, and the four-cylinder is still around. The very smaller cars, but six cylinders is pretty more common today. Uh, I look at you look at a show from the 70s. Boy, we drove some big cars. Like, well, you got SUVs, minivans, and stuff now. But like my mom had a Buick, that I inherited. This thing took up the whole lane uh, of road. Those were some big cars back in the 70s. I'll tell you. Um, some more Ford's manufacturing power was an issue. And that's a business model to be aware of is, is your competition hunting you down? Like today we have Google, right, Amazon. You dare not want to be too visible, especially maybe as a book publisher or whatever, because you've got Amazon gobbling the competition. So there's some legitimate business competitive issues going on there. But we want to also sprinkle in and be aware of any possible black-white influence and things like that. Like, let's not be fooled. Just because he was in the North doesn't mean that this Patterson company was immune and protected from racism by any means. Okay, they had a place, as we're going to talk about in a moment. So anyway, they turned their combustion engine business just wasn't working out. Okay, we got Ford and GM jamming them up. So they become more. They lean more towards chassis makers. Chassis, I mean the body of the car. Leave the frame, engine, um, suspension, axles, wheels, maybe to other manufacturers, which they did. They put their Patterson chassis, vehicles and buses on top of Ford and GM um, infrastructure. Okay, the engine and the frame and things like that. And then they tried to get ahead of the market and to make specialize in bus chassis, as now the outlying rural community is adopting the engine and getting rid of horse-drawn buses that are carrying the children back and forth and whatnot. So they got ahead and they had some foresight, so they want to get into that market, which was a very good business decision. Either way, they had flatline growth. They tried to move in 1938. They just could never recover. The Depression hits 1929, Great Depression. That's going to wipe everybody out and put a lot of issues, people in jeopardy. What some things that could possibly have happened to them? The business. There's that legitimate business power, prowess of Ford and GM hunting them down. They're looking for market share. They're running their business, but they're coming there. There's still white privilege, entitlement, power being exercised there, and this black company is struggling. So this black company, has to appeal to whites. Their cost of making their vehicles, even just the chassis, it's probably prohibitive for black folks, right? Not that it wasn't a big black folks weren't commanding salaries and things like that to regularly have cars. You see uh, rare photos of black folks with cars. You've got to be careful about making white folks jealous. That back then they can sequester and quarantine you. Now, Dr. Anderson talks about this as where um, you know, and this is the problem of vertical integration and ethno aggregation, where this black car company couldn't vertically integrate. Now, what I mean by that, see, the white folks can vertically integrate their businesses. They can draw in, you know, a rubber manufacturer. There's a rubber manufacturer not far from where I live up north. So to make the tires, and then you need steel to make other parts of the vehicle. Probably wood was a probably big thing, but where do you get the wood supplier to bring the wood and all this stuff for paneling for the car inside the car, the upholstery for leather? Do you have a system in place to get leather supply? So if you're being the car manufacturer makes the Patterson company an island. There's no vertical integration. There's no supply to up the chain to make this finished product. The company's dependent on white suppliers, so that's a problem right there. So the white suppliers can be like, let's just charge them whatever. They probably charge them a little more, but we don't take for granted the ethics of business back then, right? If Ford's got an assembly line, so the orders are huge for supplies, rubber, upholstery, leather, steel, paneling, um, interior components for this Model T, things like that, maintenance, spare parts, so, on and on. Yet the black car manufacturer just has only that single dimension to it. There's no vertical integration, as Dr. Anderson talks about. So that's one problem that I'm sure faced the Patterson company. Also, location. You see, they moved from wherever they're at, maybe from wherever they're at. It doesn't help their case if Ford sets up a big plant and dealership near them, and GM sets up a plant and dealership near them. You got Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, all up there to get those Great Lakes states. A lot of industrialization going on, so competition was just fierce. So he tries to move the company, which didn't work. Now and then the customers, do right. So being white, do you buy these cars? Do you buy these vehicles and things like that? So he tries to blend in by putting his chassis, his bodies on top of other car manufacturers' infrastructure, their tires, axles, frames, things like that, motors. But black man's just trying to maybe put the covering on. There's probably a whole bunch of sermons in that scenario right there. Right, so that doesn't work. He doesn't have black customers because the cost is already prohibitive. And then once he puts his body on the car on top of what's really important, um, it's he's had to this Patterson company has had to compromise, right? It can't be a strictly. It's no longer strictly black ownership. It's a lot of things here to process. It's a white country, white business, white entitlement, white privilege and power, access to wealth and resources, and he probably, I'm just filling in the gaps with black DNA into the history here, and so he's got to go through a lot of hurdles and hoops, and the whole time the company is just going downward and downward. He probably couldn't take advantage of the financial restructuring after the Great Depression, uh, things like that. Holding business people and such more accountable like that. Probably couldn't get loans and things. His target community is not buying his cars. The community with wealth and resources and power are buying his vehicles or himself attached to it. So he hangs in there as long as he can, but eventually the um, company does disintegrate and fall away. So now, you can find chassis, some of the horse-drawn stuff in museums, but his bid to be a vehicle manufacturer, motor-powered vehicle, has disappeared, and that now that's a case of him just being wiped out by the business with some racial pressure there. But also, man, we're going to talk about sports teams and other things like that, black businesses that were absorbed and just plain old bought out. Look at entertainment. There's no black ownership. And, through this discussion, I can see we need to have a serious discussion and understanding about vertical integration and ethno-aggregation as as we move forward in this year. Because in this case, vertical integration was definitely a factor in the failure of this company, not having more control and not having the customer base, to sustain. And this is going to be an issue if blacks come together and start being taken seriously economically and politically. Is being faithful to each other, like the whites, Asians, and Hispanics. They're going to they put themselves first, even in the midst of um, any type of price breaks and guarantees that blacks try to give them to interact. They still say no. We keep our people first. So um, the blacks just never had that economic ability to sustain a business like this. So if there's going to be some changes in a positive way, you know, we as a group are going to have to pool our resources to help businesses like this be sustainable in a very competitive and even racist. I don't want to take for granted the ethics of white business, in this country. So we got a lot of things to work on and think about. This is a good illustration. It's a good black first. It's a learning instrument, I think, that we can talk about. We can use to talk about vertical integration and ethno aggregation. Ethno aggregation is taking just our group of people and uh, discoursing amongst ourselves economically, politically, at growing and blossoming like these other groups in this country have. All right, so that's a C.R. Patterson and Sons company. That's okay. They died a quiet death, but we can learn a lot from them. We'll keep learning as the year goes forward. I'm Tomlin's Nyback. That's 365 days towards racial change. That's a Black First today on the first. Be well. See you soon.